The second episode of Surviving Earth is officially out, and so, of course, we're going to talk about it. Now, this episode takes place in the Triassic, which is already a great start. The Triassic period is a time that very seldom gets represented in documentaries, so it's awesome that it's popping up more and more nowadays. Like, I'm very happy about that. Now, to get more specific with it, this episode takes place at the very end of the Carnian Pluvial episode, which is an event that got pretty popular after the dinosaurs on Netflix. Basically, it was that point in time where it rained for 1 to 2 million years. I mean, kind of. It did not rain every single day. It was more so an increase in rainfall. It was just raining a lot. It was just, there was a lot of rain happening all year round, basically. So the episode starts off when the Carnian Pluvial event is still occurring. Like, we're at the very end of it, essentially. It's still raining. There's a lot of lush vegetation. Things are looking very green overall. The main character, so to speak, of this episode is this little baby Ishigualastia. We're basically going to be following her for the bulk of the episode as she tries to survive what is about to be a very quickly changing world. Now, it starts off with her hatching, but she's hatching in very unique circumstances. There's two male Ishigualastia that are just fighting each other. I've mentioned this in the previous episode, but the animal fights in this series so far have been pretty good. Like, they've just been really fast and dynamic and just like full of energy. In a lot of ways, they just feel like actual animal fights. So to see these two huge Dicynodonts just ram into each other all the time and just create these loud noises as they're like, pushing each other through the brush, it was a really cool sight to see. And if you don't know, Ishigualastia is a giant Dicynodont. It belongs to the Synapsida clade, which means that it is more closely related to us, to mammals as a whole, than it is to reptiles. It is another example of a sort of stem mammal. A creature that is not quite a mammal, but is the precursor of a mammal, kind of like the Inostransavia that we saw in the previous episode. At this point in the Triassic period, the land was mainly dominated by creatures like Dicynodonts. Like, dinosaurs were not nearly as prevalent. Dinosaurs were present at this point in the Triassic period, but they were not nearly as diverse, and a lot of them didn't really reach too crazy of sizes. Like, they were relatively small. Rather, the animals that filled the herbivorous niches mostly were Dicynodonts, like Ishigualastia here, and the creatures that filled the predatory niches were creatures like Saurosuchus, like the Pseudasuchians. And we do see Saurosuchus in this episode, and I quite like it as well. Now, we do officially see a dinosaur in this episode in the form of Pamphagia, which is this little heartbreaker right here. This is a cool little dinosaur because it's actually a basal sauropodomorph. You guys know sauropods, right? These guys, they're very famous, huge dinosaurs. Well, early sauropodomorphs were nothing like that. They were, of course, small and almost theropod-like in their appearance. Pamphagia is a great example of that because if you would look at that, you probably wouldn't guess that this was the precursor to the enormous sauropods that we see later in the Mesozoic. But it is, and I liked it here. I liked its design. I really liked the colors that they used, and the feathers were, of course, a very nice touch. Now, the Pamphagia is trying to attack the main character, Ishigualastia. It bites onto the top of her head and actually leaves some scarring, which was a cool little detail. It's something that will help us differentiate her from the rest of the herd. But of course, she does survive as older Ishigualastia kind of chase off the Pamphagia. One little detail that I want to mention is that the Ishigualastia kind of like, they chatter their beaks. Like, they create these loud clacking noises to ward off predators and things like that. I love that. I love the sounds that they made. It just sounded very realistic. Now, eventually the episode gets to the point where the rains just stop. They stop completely, and there's really no rainfall for about 2 years or so, for years. This is something that likely happened after the Carnian Pluvial episode. It likely became a little bit more arid and dry again, which is something that would likely see the extinction of a lot of animals that were sort of adapted for that large amount of rain. That's mainly highlighted with the Ishigualastia because it's stated that they prefer one type of food, and the type of food that they like is not really doing so well with the lack of rainfall, and so it's getting harder and harder for them to find enough of it to sustain themselves. Essentially, they've kind of specialized to only eating one type of food, even though they're surrounded by an abundance of vegetation, which is obviously opening the door for their inevitable extinction. It especially doesn't help that their food is actually eaten by rhynchosaurs as well, which, by the way, I really like the way that these rhynchosaurs looked. Isn't it wild that we've gotten rhynchosaurs in 2 documentaries this year? That's just crazy. I would have never expected to get one. That there's two different instances of Rinkosaur moments. That's crazy. Again, I really like them. Great CGI, great design, great everything. Beautiful. So time goes on in the episode and years eventually pass. We see that the young Ishigualastia has grown, and she has become the sort of babysitter of the group. That's something that was established early on in the episode, is that some members of the herd are sort of babysitters. They watch the hatchlings and they take care of them while the rest of the herd goes on and does their own thing. And she's become that, so she's defending the hatchlings that they have. And it's also noted that there are fewer hatchlings now than there were in the past. And that's, of course, something that's highlighting the decrease in their population. When the death rate starts to outweigh the birth rate, that means that a species is probably on a decline. It was also mentioned that they are losing members of their herd due to starvation and other such things. A really nice detail to show this off was that the models changed. They became really skinny. You can see their ribs. You could see more details of their skull. These animals were not doing so hot because they are losing their main food source. And it is pretty sad to see, really. Like, the fact that this show so far has portrayed mass extinctions as more so a gradual event is, first of all, very realistic, because that is how extinctions primarily work. Not all extinctions are as dramatic as the KPG one at the very end of the Cretaceous, where, of course, this giant catastrophe happened all at once, and in a relatively short amount of time, these animals went extinct. No, more so, extinctions are more, like, a lot more gradual, and this show does a good job at highlighting that very detail. Now, as I mentioned, there was also Saurosuchus, and the Saurosuchus looks really good. There's a few instances where the Ishigualastia and the Saurosuchus, butt heads. The Saurosuchus is portrayed as like the main predatory animal for the Ishigualastia. And again, they all look really good. The designs look fantastic. The CGI, I think, is a real highlight here. We also come across the Pamphagia again, and it's noted that they are omnivorous. They're seen eating leaves, despite the fact that a Pamphagia was trying to eat our main character earlier on. We also see one catch an insect, too. That seems to be true. It is thought that Pamphagia and a lot of early basal sauropodomorphs were omnivorous animals as they were transitioning into a primarily herbivorous diet. So, nice detail right there. The episode continues until we get to flash flooding. Now, they've been going through a drought for about 2 years, and so inevitably rain was going to return. And I'm sure many of you know, but once rain returns to an area where severe droughts have occurred, there's only one thing that's probably going to happen, that being flash flooding. That is something that happens today. Areas that go through drought are more susceptible to flash flooding. The reason being, the drought causes the soil to harden up, essentially. And so the water cannot be absorbed into the ground because it's just so solid. And so instead, it just builds up on the surface and incredible floods occur. And that's what happens here. It wipes out like a huge portion of the herd and even some Saurosuchus, which is also pretty sad. It's mentioned that she ends up protecting the hatchlings for the duration of the episode. And, the species can continue for a little bit, but obviously they're struggling, and they will likely continue to struggle until their inevitable extinction. Then the episode jumps forward a few million years into a later point in the Triassic period, and we are introduced to the first actual mammal in the series, that being Chalomynia. Now, I don't think that the CGI is bad here, but I don't think the CGI on this little Chalomynia is quite as good as the CGI on the other creatures. That's mainly a nitpick, just something that I wanted to bring up. But it's still really cool to finally see a mammal, and it's portrayed as filling smaller animal niches, while larger animals fill, of course, larger niches. There is a male and female Chalomynia, and they have a bunch of babies that just hatched, and so the male is tasked with going to get some food for the babies. It goes out, gets a little insect, but then is found by some baby dinosaurs, known as Zupaeosaurus. The baby designs look really good. Now, they start to chase this little Chalomynia, and it gets stuck in a log, where the mother Zupaeosaurus shows up with a a beautiful design, might I add. I love the way that she looked. Those feathers looked amazing. The coloration was just a real standout. It just looked beautiful. So it's looking pretty grim for the Chalumnia until larger basal sauropodomorphs show up. These guys are known as Lesomsaurus, and I really like the way that they looked too. Surprise, surprise, I'm liking all of the creature designs. There's a lot of really amazing paleo artists who are attached to this documentary. In fact, this episode alone had Gabriel Ugueto, Raul Martin, David Bonadonna, and Joshua Canupe. Some amazing, amazing paleo artists, I'm sure as many of you know. So the creature designs are just a real standout here. But that's essentially where the episode ends. They end with establishing that dinosaurs are starting to diversify a little bit more, which is something that did start to happen in the Triassic, and of course it led into the Jurassic, where it very dramatically happened. At this point in the Triassic, Pseudotsuchians and Dicynodonts were still very much present and still very much filling their respective niches. But this was another good episode. It was really great to follow these Dicynodonts for the whole episode. It's really cool that the Dicynodonts got such a time to shine, basically, especially larger ones like Ishigualastia. And like I mentioned before, I really liked their designs. I thought they had very good animations, and I really liked the sounds that they made. That clacking beak was just a really, really nice touch. And I thought it was a really interesting setting for an episode too. We don't hear much about the Carnian pluvial event, and so to see like the aftermath of such an event was just, it felt very unique, and it was great. It was a great time. I had a great time watching this episode. Oh, and obviously this episode once again does tie into the modern day with humans' usage of water and how we try to get water into places that water is not as common, I suppose, like in deserts and things like that, and how climate change is starting to affect rainfall, and so as a result we're experiencing a lot of droughts, and a lot of our water sources are starting to dry up. And for everybody who's saying that ending portion is preachy, it's something that certainly does need to be brought up. A big part of paleontology is exactly this: trying to understand climate change in the past so that we can better understand what's happening in the present. That's a huge part of paleontology. Like it or not, that's one of the reasons why paleontology is so important, is because once we get a better understanding of how things changed in the past, we can get a better understanding of how things are going to change in the present and the future. So I'm really glad that Surviving Earth is bringing that up, and I'm glad that they're, shedding some light on the subject, even though I know a lot of people don't like it when topics like climate change are brought up. So thank you, Surviving Earth, for bringing it up. I do appreciate it. But that's pretty much all I have for this one. Thank you guys so much for watching, and have an awesome day.